Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Game to the Con video, we're going to be discussing a couple of rumours, the first of which concerns AMD's Ryzen, which goes into what products may well be available on release and what AMD will actually be releasing in terms of CPU configuration. And the second is concerning the PS4 Pro, the Xbox Scorpio, and also the PS5, because the developers have been buzzing around quite a bit on these topics recently, and Thomas Mahler, you might recall, who is the developer behind Ori and the Blind Forest, recently kicked up a bit of a stink. He essentially said that the Scorpio is going to be a fully fledged generational upgrade, whereas he considered the PS4 Pro half-assed. Anyway, he's since clarified his statements, so we'll go into those in just a moment. So the exact configurations of Ryzen are a bit of a mystery. I did try to get some information out of AMD's Robert Hallock, but he said that they weren't willing to release that information just yet, so unfortunately all we have is conjecture. Oh, and in case you're wondering why my voice sounds crackly and croaky, I am pretty much getting absolutely skull-fucked with a cold, which is absolutely spiffy. Anywho, so, the rumoured series for the processor is SR3, SR5 and SR7. The one consistent, and by the way, SR, we're assuming stands for Summit Ridge. The one consistent is the high-end Summit Ridge part is going to be 8 cores, 16 threads with 16 megabytes of level 3 cache. Now, for those of you who do not know, I'll quickly go into the breakdown of a Zen CPU. Basically, each CPU core is capable of handling 2 threads, in other words SMT, simultaneous multi-threading, and 4 cores go into one CPU complex, also known as CCX. So in short, 1 CCX equals 4 cores, 8 cores equals 2 CCX, which obviously means 16 threads. Okay, we're good. So there have been a few ideas bandied about, and a website by the name of Zolcorn claims to have reliable sources which tell us that we're actually not going to be seeing the 6-core 12-thread model. Instead, we're going to see the SR7, which is 8-core, then an 8-core 8-thread model. And basically, that means that SMT is going to be disabled. And finally, the low end is a 4-core 8-thread model. Now, once again, Rod from the Facebook page has been messaging me a few things, and there have been a couple of reports which have sprung up on AnandTech, specifically on the forum, which might hint to the reasons that they've decided to go this route. Now, for those of you who have been following Ryzen's development for some time, you might recall that there were bugs in the CPU. And the bug is that supposedly a member by the name of Tunafish on anandtech.com, well, I guess he is a favourite with cats, I don't know. Anyway, the bug says that when two threads run on CPUs and the UOP cache is used, sometimes, rarely, it's in fact rare enough that you can run benchmarks with the chips and not have it happen every run, a thread gets delivered instructions from the memory map of the other thread. Now, just if you don't know what that means, it basically means that the chip gets confused. So let's assume that you have an instruction on thread 1, which says, I don't know, 1 plus 1, and then obviously it needs to calculate what 1 plus 1 is. The other thread might have another instruction, which is, let's say, find what 2 times, I don't know, 4 is, just for example. Well, obviously, if the 2 threads get confused and the chip's like, okay, well, you know, the result of the first thread, okay, I need to know what 2 times 4 is, and then it spits that data out to the first thread. It's giving it the wrong data, essentially. So there are 2 ways to mitigate this. The first is to disable UOPS cache, which means you are losing IPC, because basically you're disabling certain cache on chip, or you can turn off the second thread. So you can use the UOPS cache and you don't lose the IPC, in other words, instructions per clock, but you lose the second thread. So what they're basically saying is that if they've made a lot of them, this is why they are sticking to 4 or 8 cores. There is another little caveat / tidbit on this. I don't know how much stock I put in it, but supposedly another user by the name of Stilt, who is another pretty infamous overclocker, has also been saying that if a single CCX core is defective, the other CCX core must also, there has to be at least 2 cores disabled on a CCX, because basically the number of processors needs to be balanced. So in short, you can't have like 3 CCXs, 3 cores in a CCX, it doesn't work. This means that if you're trying to create a 6-core processor with Ryzen, if this rumour is accurate, you basically need to pair a full CCX with 4 cores with a CCX which has 2 disabled. Now obviously that's really down to you. The problem with a lot of these rumours, and I'm just going to be really honest with you, is that there is a lot of information which is conflicting. For example, AMD have told us that there is going to be multiple Ryzen models on launch, but another rumour is telling us there's going to be no 4-core on launch. Another rumour, of course, has said that there is essentially going to be a black edition of the SR7s, which are going to have higher clocks. But is that going to be the case now? Because we've got 2 processors which are 8 cores, it's just one of them has, at least according to these rumours, SMT disabled. Now, my thinking behind this, and the reason I believe so many of these rumours are popping up, and so many of them are, conflicting with the others, is I think some of them are bullshit. I think some of them are basically people making them up. But I also believe that so many of them are genuine, it's just that they're taking at different parts in the design process. For example, if you've ever worked in any company, you'll know how quickly things can change overnight, and this is especially true in technology and processor design. For example, it could be, and I don't know what their yields are, I don't want to pretend I know, so I'm just going to say the figures I'm going to spout right now are bullshit. I'm just using them as an example. But let's assume that for AMD, they want the 4 processors inside the CCX to be fully functional with SMT, and let's say they consider that 100% functional, right? Well, they might have figured that the yields would be 75% at the start. However, they might actually find that their yields are better and they might be 82%, okay? So if that's the case, that means they actually have more whole chips than what they anticipated. So it makes more sense for them just to disable SMT perhaps, or perhaps the part they thought was going to fail didn't fail, and that's why they're going with the 8-core, but 8-thread model, in other words, SMT disabled. We just don't know, and this stuff can happen overnight. One thing we do kind of know is that the processor is running at 3.9 GHz, because that image was leaked when folks started to actually play around with the test systems, which of course were held at the various events that AMD have been showing off recently, especially at CES. There was a clear image of a Ryzen CPU running at 3.9 GHz. I asked Robert Halleck, and he said he can't confirm it or deny it. And then I heard from a couple of other sources that the CPU actually is not 3.9 GHz, it actually runs at 4 GHz. Basically, Lisa Su and a couple of other top brass at AMD ordered a Reese Pin of the CPUs because they wanted even higher clocks. Now, is 100 MHz going to make much of a difference in reality? Probably not. But 4 GHz does sound a lot better than 3.9, and to be fair, we don't also know what the Reese Pin did. It could be that the Reese Pin also reduced voltage consumption or whatever. So anyway, I'm just reporting the news. Ultimately, take it or leave it, and figure out yourselves what's true. We'll certainly know when the CPUs are launched. Okay, so let's switch topics to Scorpio and the PS4 and the PS4.5, also known as Neo, and the PS5. That was a bit of a thing. So Thomas Mahler, who is a developer on Ori on the Blind Forest, took to NeoGAF and basically said that the PS4 Pro was half-assed and believes that the Scorpio is a fully fledged generational upgrade. Okay. He has since added more stuff to this. He said it's pretty clear where things are headed. Here's my prediction. When Sony announces the PS5, which is going to be after the Scorpio's release, I vehemently agree with him there. It can't be beforehand at this point. We're going to hear it's compatible with your entire PS4 library. Since it's like the PS4 Pro, it's going to be on the hardware upgrade based on the same architecture. You'll see games that are going to be announced will not only be exclusive to PS5, since it would hurt developers. A new console comes out and we're going from hardware platform that is 50 or so million installed to say 5. So automatically, I would reach a much smaller audience. So a lot of games will still be forward compatible, but it's whether Sony forces them to do it or not. I'm going to take that as to say that essentially, if you can make a game that would run on the PS4 or PS4 Pro hardware, then you're welcome to. But if you just want to target the PS5 specifically and go into that knowing that, yeah, okay, you're going to only be having a much smaller install base, then that's down to the developer. He also added, are there any next generation games out there that in purely gameplay couldn't have been done on the last generation console? Devs will have to treat consoles like PCs, having multiple hardware configurations, and adjust the games too. Having to make the distinction between cross-generation games and, well, we're just different games that have been shipped for different boxes is really just bogus. Wouldn't you have preferred to buy Titanfall once and then not have to play, and then be able to play it on the PC, Xbox 360 and Xbox One, instead of having to buy it on separate versions? That's exactly what Microsoft are doing. You can buy a game for the Xbox platform, which means you'll be able to play it on any of the Microsoft platforms. He also said that the PS4 Pro, he apologised for his comments and said, this is the second time already that I took part in a discussion on GAF, only to then see something that I thought was a somewhat innocent comment. He agreed that calling a platform half-assed wasn't the nicest way of putting things, but he also said he's not a native English speaker, so he didn't mean to come off as rude, blow up in his face. I'm just a developer who loves games and part of these passionate discussions. Sorry if I offended anyone, it wasn't his intention. End quote. Now I have a whole bunch of stuff that I could add to this, and I guess I'll start with the most obvious. First things first, I 100% agree with him that the PS5 is going to be released after Scorpio. It doesn't make sense for them to release it sooner than that, because that would mean that the PS4.5, PS4 Pro, whatever you want to call it, has not been out long enough for people basically not to be pissed off that there's an upgrade already. I also 100% agree that the PS5 will most likely be backwards compatible. I don't think Sony are going to be abandoning AMD at any time soon. Especially, as we've heard with the Infinity Fabric stuff, it makes it a lot easier for AMD to do respins and AMD to make changes to particular hardware. So it just makes an awful lot of sense for them to stick with them, have the GCN architecture or its successors, which I guess is NCU now. We've got Vega and God knows what it's going to be called with Navi. My prediction is we're going to get Scorpio at the end of this year, whatever that date may be. And then early next year, we're going to start hearing the murmurs of the PS4 successor, whatever it's going to be called. Let's assume it's going to be called the PS5. And then probably about 2019-ish, we're going to see the console launched onto the shelves. And I personally believe it's going to be just a more powerful, more upgraded PS4 Pro. So it's going to have a more powerful GPU, a more powerful CPU, and it all just makes a lot of sense if you think about it. But with all of that said, what about the rest of his comments? Well, I do feel Microsoft have done a lot wrong with the Xbox One, especially at the launch, but they have done a lot of right stuff, and cross-buy is certainly one of those. Now, admittedly, it does have some issues and limitations. For example, well, you have to buy it digitally, which sucks. So let's, for the sake of argument, say that you mosey on out, you go to the store, you pick up a copy of Titanfall, and you come back home and you put it into your Xbox One. You've got it for the Xbox One, but it doesn't activate in your account for the PC, which is a bit disappointing. I wish it could do that. But even so, the fact that you can cross-buy games is good. And it does piss a lot of people off, and it's one of the criticisms. If you notice about one of the things that really piss off people about Nintendo is the fact that you can buy a game and, well, how many times do you have to buy The Legend of Zelda? Like the first Legend of Zelda. It's like, how many times has it been on various consoles now? It's just ridiculous. You have to keep buying the same game, and it just pisses people off. It's different if there's like changes to it. For example, let's say, 3 or 4 years later, they released an upgraded Legend of Zelda and there was a few extra maps. Maybe it's like the equivalent of the director's cut. Then okay, people don't mind coughing up. But when it's exactly the same game, especially if it's released at the same time, it does annoy people. And people are also less likely to buy 2 or 3 copies of the same game on launch unless they've really got the funds to do it. Which means that you've got to make decisions. For example, if you've got an Xbox One, but you're also a PC gamer, do you buy it on the PC to play with Bob and Tom, or do you buy it on the Xbox One to play with Claire and, and Billy? It's those decisions which annoy people. So I do feel that is probably going to make things a bit better. I will wonder, however, if it's going to be in the future that games are going to be more expensive with cross-buy, because technically speaking, sales figures would slightly be lower, because there are people who buy them on the PS4 and the Xbox One, or the PC and the PS4, and I do know people who have done that exact same thing. Now, admittedly, those people are in the minority, but it still, technically speaking, might affect sales figures of especially online-focused games. Now, what about the PS4 Pro and him calling it half-arsed? Well, it's kind of weird because it's kind of a rude statement, but it's just like, it's a statement. At the end of the day, if that's his opinion on it, then it is what it is. I mean, I don't know if the personally, I would say that the PS4 Pro is a bit half-arsed. It is slightly overclocked and stuff, and I think there are a lot of people who are disappointed with the system. And I can't comment on the Scorpio because we just don't know if it's half-assed. Like, Microsoft are telling us, no, it's not a half-assed system, but yeah, of course they're going to tell us it. But ultimately, until we get the specifications, I'm going to reserve judgment. We do know some things, like, for example, it doesn't have ESRAM, because the GDDR5 memory is going to be ample enough. It's got 12 gigs, supposedly, although that hasn't been 100% clarified. It supposedly has some form of 8-core processor. It looks to me like it's not the Jaguar. It's probably going to be a Puma, maybe a little bit better. Maybe some Puma hybrid. Some folks are speculating it's going to have some Ryzen features in there, but ultimately we just don't know yet. To be honest, I think that Microsoft are being deliberately vague, because they don't know themselves exactly what custom parts are going to be inside the system. I do believe it's going to have at the very least Polaris/Vega based GPU, and it is obviously going to be more advanced than the PS4 Pro, if only in terms of T-flops. But does any of that mean that it's not half-arsed? Well, kinda. It depends on whether there's going to be issues with balance, like is the CPU going to be really too slow for the GPU? And I think that was a big concern with the PS4 Pro. One of the reasons that I know a lot of people are pissed at the PS4 Pro is because it can't technically render 4K. And there are other things as well, like, for example, the fact that it can't handle certain things, I guess, that we expected, like the fact it doesn't have a 4K Blu-ray player. That pissed a lot of people off. The fact that the CPU is, yes, slower than perhaps what we expected it to be. We expected it to be considerably faster. We expected maybe a very high clock Jaguar rather than running at 2.1 gigahertz. But ultimately, I think Sony did an okay job with it. I don't think it was a bad system. I just don't think it was quite what we expected. And I think for a lot of folks who own a PS4, the regular PS4, it's probably not enough to upgrade to a PS4 Pro unless you've got like specific usage scenarios. On the other hand, if you don't own a PS4 and you're just looking to maybe buy a new console, then I can certainly see the appeal of buying the Pro over a vanilla PS4, because the price differential is not enough to make you really turned off with the PS4 Pro. That's just my opinions though. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Apologies for my voice sounding like sandpaper, but it is what it is. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.